Hello, and welcome to Prairie Pulse. Coming up a little bit later in the show, we'll see an artifact spotlight from the Kittson County History Center and Museum in Lake Bronson, Minnesota. But first, joining me now is Joe Kennedy. Joe Kennedy, of course, you're from Concordia College, where you're an instructional designer and academic technologist.
Yes.
Okay, well, welcome. Thanks for joining us today. But you're also one of the campus's leaders in artificial intelligence. And that's what we're here today to talk about. But before we get into that, tell the folks a little bit about yourself, please, and where you're from, maybe.
Well, I grew up with my dad in the Navy, so I'm not really from anywhere. I'm a husband, a father, a citizen. I'm also a teacher. And at Concordia College as an instructional designer, my job is to help faculty incorporate technology to make their already good teaching even better.
Okay. Well, you are here to talk about what I'm going to say is new, and I don't know how new you'll qualify it, and somewhat controversial topic, AI, artificial intelligence. I think the general public has trouble kind of understanding what it really is. Can you maybe explain what AI is?
Well, sure. The idea of AI is to use machines to replicate what we think of as intelligence, to represent information, to make decisions based on that information. And of course, we've got ideas of AI from 2001: A Space Odyssey and Terminator and movies like that. And AI, in one sense, does try to give machines the ability to reason. But since we don't really know how intelligence works in the human brain, AI takes multiple paths to try and replicate it. What we're seeing now is a focus on what's called generative AI. And generative AI seeks to create new things rather than just retrieve information. And it does so by focusing on probabilities.
Well, I may circle back around to that. But, you know, when you think about it, it's really concerning people quite a bit. So what are negative circumstances, I guess, potentially misuses of AI?
I'm glad you put it that way, because it really is, like, AI itself is not a bad technology or a good technology. It's going to be how we use it. The biggest concerns about the misuse of AI, the most obvious ones, are the creation of misinformation and disinformation, literal fake news rather than just rhetorical fake news. And a concern down the road is, as we develop artificial intelligence, if it becomes better and better, do we turn over some of our decision-making and autonomy to a system? For example, traffic lights right now are governed by a rudimentary AI system. And so we've turned over decisions about when a traffic light should go red or green away from human control and saying every 45 seconds it'll cycle or every 2 minutes it will cycle. So the long-term concern is, as more and more systems adopt AI, are we giving up the ability to make decisions? But that's a ways down the road.
Well, there's so much of this I think people don't understand. One of the things that I discovered a few months ago, or somebody introduced me to, ChatGPT. Tell me more about that. What is ChatGPT?
Well, it is most people's introduction to artificial intelligence because it is the first system that is available to anyone with an internet connection. So if you think about when graphing calculators first came out in the 80s and 90s and schools were trying to adapt to those, well, ChatGPT is the whole world adapting to a new technology that is all of a sudden affordable. And it is an interface that allows people to ask questions and get answers that may actually be new. So instead of just saying, Siri, who was the first president of the United States, or Googling the capital of Kansas, you can ask ChatGPT to take a whole bunch of ideas and turn them into an outline. Or you can ask it to explain something to you as if you're a third grader. So it goes way beyond just Googling. On the backside, it's more of the generative AI. It's creating new information. But it's important to note it's all done by probability. So ChatGPT doesn't know that George Washington was the first president of the United States. What it does know is that it read billions of pieces of data. And almost every time the phrase first president of the United States appeared, George Washington appeared in close proximity. So it's sort of like running the odds. It's betting that it's right when it says George Washington was the first president.
So what you're telling me there is ChatGPT can be wrong, much like Wikipedia in the early days. It might give you the wrong information.
Yes, it can be wrong, and it can hallucinate, which is where it just completely invents things, and that'll become fewer and fewer. But it will still always have that possibility. It's just playing the odds.
Well, let's go back to what are the origins of AI? How did it get invented, if that's the right thing to say or ask?
Well, it's not one specific thing. It's been more of an evolution. It's always been something ever since we've started working with computers that computer scientists have wondered is, can we make this computer think like a human being? So it's been evolving. It's going to continue to evolve. The reason it's on our minds right now is because one company, OpenAI, released this one product, ChatGPT, and said to anyone, if you can get to the internet, you can use AI. And so that's why it's really hit our consciousness. But it's been evolving for decades.
Yeah. Well, you told me this a few minutes ago, I think. Generative AI. So what are the differences? What's generative AI and what's just AI? Are they different?
Right. So the very earliest versions of AI are embedded in computers to begin with. In the Turing, going back to Alan Turing and the difference engines, the idea is if we could write hundreds of thousands of instructions to a computer that say, in this situation, do this, but in that situation, do this. If we could come up with hundreds of thousands of those, we could take all the complexity of the decisions and human knowledge and turn it into a series of on or off, 1 or 0 decisions. And so that's what we started with for AI. What generative AI says is, instead of requiring a computer to go down the left path or the right path thousands of times to make a decision, let's give it a lot of data, and based on that data, it'll start to see probabilities and patterns. And from those, it can generate something new. And we see that, it's actually even easier to see when we talk about products like DALL-E or Midjourney, which create pictures that have never existed before, and that's why they're called generative. It's brand new. So it's easier to see when there's an actual picture, but it's doing the same thing when it gives you a textual response.
Okay. Well, let's turn to AI and education. What's the potential impact of generative AI on assessment in higher education?
Oh, it's so amazing. We could talk about just that for 20 minutes. But to boil it down, probably 3 things. First of all, we can use generative AI on the teacher side to provide better and more personalized feedback. So the reality is, you've asked me here to talk about AI. There are all sorts of people who can talk about AI and do it really well. But if there was someone who was teaching AI, their true genius is that they can take what John is saying and the way John is thinking about it, and they can give you some feedback that will help the way you think about it go more towards the truth. Generative AI can help teachers do that. It's the one thing that all the machine systems we've got out there haven't been able to help. So it can really help make the feedback more personal and make your learning better. It also can make better decisions about what we should be giving you for the next step, because it's adapting to the way you think, the way you write, and the knowledge you're displaying. And because of that, this is where the real power comes in. Because generative AI can help us make learning more personal and deeper, it really engenders that sense of curiosity that we have as kids. Because now, no matter how old you are, you can keep asking why, and you're not going to exhaust the resources of the teacher because they have this other tool to help them.
So what are the ethics of generative AI in the context of being a responsible and engaged citizen?
Well, thanks for using that phrase, because it's right there in our mission statement at Concordia. It's almost like you planned that. We worry first about the obvious ethics. This is a tool that makes it easy to lie. If somebody wants to use this tool to lie, a fake news story, a fake picture, a deep fake video, they can. And so we do worry about the ethics there. But the ethical concerns go further. If we look at how is generative AI learning? Well, it's learning by looking at this vast corpus of data. And not everybody whose work is represented in that data gave permission for that data to be used for the machine to learn from. And so artists like Stephen King are suing OpenAI and saying, you're creating a product based on my intellectual property. And then the algorithms that take that data and teach the machine how to learn contain the human biases that we programmed into them, so we have to worry about that as well.
Mm-hmm. You know, what are the likely generative AI skills students would expect to need when they graduate?
The first one is going to be prompt engineering. That's on everybody's mind. The director of our Career Center pointed out to me that back in March, ResumeBuilder.com polled a whole bunch of companies. 91% of them said, we'll be honest, we expect our new employees to come in knowing how to use AI to teach our current employees. And the most important skill is asking the right question. This is just a tool that can help us organize our thoughts, find new things, come up with new works of art. But if we don't ask the right question, it's garbage in, garbage out. Mm-hmm. So prompt engineering, if I just had to answer in one phrase.
Yeah, but you know, are there ways that generative AI make teachers' jobs easier?
Oh yes, it helps us as teachers because we can come up with better organized lesson plans, for example. I teach my students how to use ChatGPT to create extra problems for them to work on. So if a student knows they're really struggling with one concept, I don't have to come up with extra worksheets, extra quizzes, extra discussion prompts. I teach them how to use one of these tools to create the prompts for them, and then they work through them, and I can help them evaluate if it's right or wrong, but it saves a lot of the administrative time in the background.
Yeah, so it is being used in classrooms, and how extensively is it being used? You say you're using it, but yeah.
Almost 2/3 of the faculty at Concordia College at least talk about it. Some of them, like Professor Darren Olness and a lot of the professors in our Comm Studies department, use it very specifically. They teach students how to use it to take what a student already knows and ask questions, a lot of what ifs, that lead the students into ways that they can better explore the questions that are really on their mind.
Mm-hmm. You know, what's the potential of generative AI in misinformation and disinformation campaigns? You know, thinking about elections and, of course, in matters of international concern. How do you teach students and people to spot such campaigns, or can you?
You can. I mean, it's really at the heart of a liberal arts education and the idea of critical thinking to begin with. The first question that people should ask themselves is, does this seem believable? Like, if you yourself are shocked when you see a photo or read a news story, you should be asking yourself, is it for real? Because sometimes shocking things are. I remember on 9/11, none of us believed what was happening, but it was. But most of the time, when we think, I can't believe this is happening, then we're not being told the whole story. So the first thing that people should do is ask themselves, is this shocking? And then say, is there an apparent purpose? Like, when you tell someone there's been an earthquake, a lot of times you're just wanting to tell people there's been an earthquake. But if someone comes to you and says, this candidate, I have a picture of them wearing blackface, or I have a picture of this candidate for office with Jeffrey Epstein, people should immediately be thinking, well, obviously, if that's true, that's bad for the candidate. So the person telling me might have a vested interest. And if there appears to be a vested interest, they should look further. Honestly, with ready access to the internet, it's pretty easy to take a picture and run it through Google search or to search for a key term in a news story. And if a person does that, and they don't immediately see lots of other stories that are independently saying the same thing, there's a good chance that it was used to be fake. And more, it's going to be AI that's creating the fakes because it can do it so much quicker than humans can.
Yeah, we're hearing stories today about, your voice can be cloned in a matter of seconds, and then with images, of course. So there's so much opportunity for misuse of AI at this point. Is that not true?
Unfortunately, there is a lot of opportunity, and Candace King and Mr. Beast and Tom Hanks will tell you, don't buy a product just because someone you like and follow endorses it, because in their 3 cases, they didn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, talk maybe about some of the AI seminar, webinars and seminars that you've participated in, and sort of what's come out of those, I guess, is what I'm interested in.
Well, so at the end of November last year is when ChatGPT came out, and it truly was a bright line demarking before and after. And so the next few months, most of the webinars were very much about, this is going to ruin our ability to assess students because they can use ChatGPT to write their essays. And so it's not just using Google or Chegg to look up an answer. It's creating entire works of argumentation. But then, as the months went on, the webinars became much more about, look at all the ways we can use this tool to help students learn better, and the ways that we can teach students to notice when someone is using this tool for nefarious purposes. So most of the webinars now are much more focused on that because at the end of the day, there's no technological solution to a human being wanting to deceive us.
Yeah. Well, you told me many or maybe most students are using AI already, but are they concerned about the future of AI, or maybe not as much? It's a reality of it's going to be there.
Well, it's still too new to draw a lot of conclusions, but it appears that if you were to say, what are students most worried about in terms of large-scale problems, they're much more worried about the effects of climate change. Or in the United States and other countries, they're much more worried about what appears to be an authoritarian creep than they are about AI.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the most recent actors and writers strike, AI was an issue. Did you follow that much? Can you talk about what that was about?
Right. The concern that SAG-AFTRA and the writers' unions had was the motion picture companies and the content streamers have enough money that they could use the computing power. It costs a lot of money to do a really good AI impersonation of someone. But these entities had enough money, and if they wanted to, they could say, well, John, we have hundreds of hours of footage of you interviewing people, it's not that hard to create fake John to do an interview. And so they wanted assurances that that would not happen. Or in the worst case scenario, that the studios would not say to actors who are extras, which is how they gain their entree into film usually, and say, oh, we have your likeness as an extra now. We're just going to use that as an extra for the next 100 crowd scenes. And they were worried about that could have happened. And the industry says, no, that wasn't our intention. But now it's actually going to be in the contract from what we know on the outside.
So with the crystal ball, I'm sure you've got one, no? Are you concerned about AI or not as concerned as some of the more dire warnings we're hearing about, such as the end of civilization? These kinds of predictions, can you comment at all on that?
We are a long way from the apocalyptic vision of HAL or the machines in the Matrix or in Terminator.
Yeah.
But I am worried about the human tendency to see a tool and want to know how they can use the tool to exert power over other people. So that worries me much more.
Yeah, so basically the genie's out of the bottle and it's not going to be put back in.
Correct.
Yeah. Where do you see AI in 10 years or so? And you got to do it real quick.
I see it like an iceberg. We're only going to see the most obvious things, but it's going to underlie everything that we do. We already use it in very specialized ways, like healthcare decisions, very successfully, and we just don't notice it.
Well, we are out of time. If people want more information, where can they go?
They can go to openai.com, which has resources, research, and about us on their website, or they could contact the computer science departments at Concordia, NDSU, NDSCS.
All right. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for the opportunity, John.
Stay tuned for more. In this Artifact Spotlight from the Kittson County History Center and Museum in Lake Bronson, Minnesota, Ed Jerome talks about his Métis ancestors who helped settle this northwest corner of Minnesota.
Hi, this is Ed Jerome at the Kittson County Historical Museum at Lake Bronson, Minnesota, and this is our Artifact Spotlight. My great-grandfather, Andre Jerome, was born in the Red River Settlement, which is where Winnipeg is today. And sometime in the early 1840s, they immigrated to Pembina. They were buffalo hunters, participated in the buffalo hide trade, and also making the cart trips to St. Paul. I built a ox cart as a tribute to the ancestors that participated in the trade from the Red River Valley to St. Paul on the Mississippi. Tried to build it a similar or a replica of the originals. They're built out of mainly oak, and the hubs were built of elm because they're stringy wood and less chance of them splitting or breaking, and they wore well. And the stakes on the basket are ash. Figure it takes about a couple hundred hours to build one. That's with mostly modern tools. 1872 was one of the first settlers in Kittson County. He raised a large family, had 10 children. The Métis are children of the fur traders and indigenous women from the area. There's several generations, like Andre Jerome was, his great-grandmother would have been an indigenous woman, and his great-grandfather was a French voyageur from Montreal. This is a pipe that belonged to my great-grandfather, Andre Jerome. Wood from an ash tree and then the willow for the pipe stem. In about 1983, we had a family reunion, and a cousin brought it and donated it to the Kittson County Museum. This is a sash a Métis wore. It was originally used by the voyageurs on their canoe trips from St. Paul, they wrapped around their waist to help prevent hernias because of the heavy packs they carried. We're proud of our ancestors. They were opened up the country to trade. We're proud of all our ancestors. This is Ed Jerome, and this is our Artifact Spotlight.
Well, that's all we have on Prairie Pulse this week, and as always, thanks for watching.
Funded by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund with money from the vote of the people of Minnesota on November 4, 2008. And by the members of Prairie Public.